Bodies in the bayou. It is a term that we have heard here in Houston many times in the past, but not like we have over the past week.
Yes, 5 bodies have been discovered in our city's bayous over the last week. Downtown Houston examining any potential connections.
Houston is a city defined by its water. But in 2025, the bayous began giving up secrets the public wasn't ready to face. As the body count climbed to 34,
the Houston Chronicle reporting the medical examiner's office recorded 35 deaths from the bayous in 2024, and so far this year, there's now around 34 deaths.
a terrifying realization emerged from the police department. It wasn't just the frequency of the deaths that was chilling, it was the specific forensic dead zones investigators uncovered. These findings suggests that the murky waters are not just a resting place, but a force that actively erases the truth. Something is happening in the deep, stagnant bends of these waterways, and the evidence is vanishing before it can ever be told. The investigation's darkest finding. As the body count in Houston's bayous climbed toward the mid-30s throughout 2025, investigators from the Houston Police Department and the Harris County Institute of Forensic Sciences began to notice a pattern that was more disturbing than any single crime scene. It wasn't just the frequency of the deaths, it was the biological and environmental reality of the bayous themselves. Police essentially discovered a forensic eraser, a specific set of conditions in Houston's waterways that systematically destroys evidence, creating what some experts have termed forensic dead zones. This discovery fundamentally changed how the city viewed its waterways, shifting the focus from individual tragedies to a terrifying natural phenomenon that masks the truth. The most significant finding from the medical examiner's office in 2025 was the staggering percentage of cases labeled undetermined. By December, nearly 40% of the bodies recovered from Buffalo and Brays bayous resulted in inconclusive autopsies. This is a remarkably high number for a modern metropolitan area with state-of-the-art forensic technology. Investigators realized that the combination of Houston's oppressive humidity, the stagnant, bacteria-heavy water of the bayous, and the presence of urban wildlife creates a perfect environment for rapid decomposition. This isn't just a matter of a body being difficult to identify, it is a matter of the environment stripping away the very indicators of life and death that the justice system relies upon. In several of the 34 cases, bodies were found within 48 to 72 hours of a person going missing. Yet, they were already in advanced stages of putrefaction. For police, this discovery was a professional nightmare. In a standard homicide, detectives look for soft tissue evidence, bruising around the neck that indicates strangulation, DNA under fingernails from a struggle, or subtle defensive wounds on the forearms. However, in the bayou, the water acts as a hostile solvent. It washes away trace evidence while the heat accelerates the breakdown of the skin and muscles. Investigators found that even in cases where they strongly suspected foul play, the environment had effectively cleaned the victim, leaving behind nothing but questions. The water doesn't just hold the body, it consumes the story the body is trying to tell. This eraser effect also extends to toxicology, which is often the last line of defense in an investigation. While many victims were found with substances in their systems, the undetermined label often persisted because the time spent in the water made it impossible to tell if the substance levels were a contributing factor to the death or merely a coincidence. The police discovery was clear. The bayous are not just deep and dark. They are chemically and biologically hostile to the truth. When a body is submerged in the warm, churning silt of Buffalo Bayou, the chemical shifts in the blood make it nearly impossible to determine if a person was incapacitated before they hit the water or if they were conscious and struggling to breathe. This lack of forensic clarity created a void that the public was all too eager to fill with their own theories. Without a definitive cause of death, every undetermined ruling was viewed by the community as a possible cover-up or a failure to acknowledge a predator. Police were caught in a trap where the more they tried to explain the science of decomposition, the more the public believed they were hiding a serial killer. The discovery of these dead zones meant that, for dozens of families, there would likely never be a CSI moment where a single piece of evidence solved the mystery. Instead, they were left with a scientific shrug. The most terrifying discovery wasn't a man in the shadows, but the fact that the bayou itself could hide a monster perfectly. It became clear that in Houston, the environment is the ultimate accomplice, ensuring that whatever happens in the dark stays in the dark forever. While the science was failing, the sheer volume of the dead began to tell a story of its own. A summer of high water and higher body counts. The sheer frequency of the discoveries throughout 2025 turned a local concern into a statewide obsession. To understand the gravity of what the Houston Police Department was facing, one must look at the cold, hard data they compiled during their year-end briefings. In 2023, the number of bodies recovered from the city's vast network of bayous stood at a relatively low 9. By 2024, that number spiked to 35. As 2025 progressed, it became clear that the previous year was not an anomaly, but the start of a grim new baseline. By late December 2025, the count reached 34, marking a 2-year period where a body was pulled from the water roughly every 10 days. This statistical surge created a timeline of terror that kept the city in a perpetual state of mourning and suspicion. The most concentrated period of these discoveries, which police later referred to as a statistical anomaly that fueled mass hysteria, occurred during what local activists called Black September. Within a span of just 11 days, 6 bodies were recovered from different sections of the Bayou system. This was the moment the serial killer narrative moved from the fringes of the internet into mainstream conversation. On September 5th, a body was found floating near the University of Houston downtown. 2 days later, another surfaced near a popular jogging trail. By the time the 5th body was pulled from the water on September 10th, the city's anxiety had reached a breaking point. Police were holding daily press conferences, attempting to explain that these deaths were not linked, but the sheer velocity of the finds made their logic seem like a desperate attempt to maintain order. What made the 2025 timeline so haunting was the lack of seasonality. Usually, drowning incidents in urban waterways spike during the hottest months of the summer when people are more likely to be active near the water or seeking relief from the heat. However, the 2025 discoveries remained consistent throughout the year. Even as the city headed into the holiday season, the bayous continued to yield victims. In the final 2 weeks of December alone, 3 more bodies were discovered, effectively shattering any hope that the September spike was a one-time event. This consistency suggested to the public that there was a persistent threat, a killer who didn't take breaks or follow the patterns of the weather. For investigators, mapping this timeline was a grim exercise in frustration. They looked for commonalities in the dates, the times of disappearance, and the locations of the discoveries. What they found instead was a scattered map of human tragedy. While some bodies were clustered near the downtown area, others were found in the far reaches of the suburbs, miles away from any central hub. This lack of a geographical or temporal signature is exactly what led the chief of police to maintain that no serial killer was at work. Yet, for the families watching the news every night, the timeline felt like a countdown. Each new discovery was a reminder that the city's waterways had become a conveyor belt for the deceased, and the clock was always ticking toward the next find. This period of high water and higher body counts didn't just drain police resources, it drained the city's sense of safety, leaving a permanent mark on the 2025 calendar as the year the bayous refused to be quiet. In the middle of these rising numbers stood one mystery that changed the narrative from a statistic to a tragedy. The case of Jade McKisick. Of all the 34 bodies recovered in 2025, the case of Jade McKisick is the one that arguably fundamentally shifted the public's perception of the bayous.
Breaking news in the last half hour, Houston police say the initial autopsy of 20-year-old U of H student Jade McKisick. McKisick's body was recovered earlier this week from Bayou 4 days after she was last seen.
A 20-year-old junior at the University of Houston, McKisick was more than a statistic. She was a campus resident, a student employee, and a bright student majoring in strategic communications and advertising. Known affectionately as Sage, she was described by university officials and friends as a light in everyone's life. When she vanished on September 11, 2024, the subsequent investigation didn't just highlight a single tragedy. It exposed the unsettling gaps in forensic science and urban safety that the city was struggling to address. The timeline of her disappearance is chilling in its simplicity. McKisick was last seen at approximately 1 a.m. after spending an evening with friends at local bars near the University of Houston campus. Surveillance footage from a gas station near the corner of Scott and McGregor captured her final known moments. She purchased a drink and then walked alone toward the dark, sloping banks of Bayou. Crucially, she had left her cell phone behind at the bar, a detail that initially hampered the search but also added a layer of confusion to her state of mind. 4 days later, on September 15th, her body was recovered from the water at 4,900 Spur 5, roughly 2.5 miles away from where she was last seen. The shocking element of the McKisick discovery, however, was the autopsy report. In a city already on edge due to the sheer volume of bodies appearing in the water,
we've been at this gas station you see right here behind me all day, and people have been asking us about Jade, telling us that they've been seeing her story all over the news. But Jade was seen right here in this parking lot.
the public expected a clear answer. Instead, the Harris County Institute of Forensic Sciences revealed that there were no signs of trauma or foul play. To a community convinced a predator was stalking the trails, the idea that a healthy, successful young woman could simply end up in the bayou without a struggle felt like an impossible pill to swallow. This lack of physical evidence, no bruises, no defensive wounds, no signs of a fight, led the Houston Police Department to state they did not suspect a crime had been committed. Yet the undetermined nature of the cause of death only fueled more skepticism. McKisick's case became the rallying point for those who felt the city was ignoring a pattern. Local community strategists and advocacy groups pointed out that the area where her body was found was not a place students typically frequented, especially late at night. The question hung heavy over the university. How does a sober-appearing student, seen walking with a drink in hand on camera, fall into a bayou and drown without anyone noticing or any evidence of an accident? For the family, the news was a total shock, and for the student body, it was a terrifying wake-up call about the lack of barriers and lighting along the waterways that cut through their campus life. The Jade McKisick case represents the core of the 2025 Bayou mystery. It sits at the intersection of a clean forensic report and a deeply suspicious set of circumstances. While the police used her case as evidence that these deaths were individual accidents or tragedies, the public used it as proof that the bayous were a black hole where the truth was being swallowed. Because there was no killer to arrest and no clear accident to point to, her death remained an open wound for the city. A reminder that in the forensic dead zones of the Houston bayous, even the most promising lives can disappear without leaving a single trace of how they were lost. If the most high-profile case yielded no evidence of a struggle, the city had to look at the lethal geography of its own backyard. The digital boogeyman versus the systemic reality. As the official body count in Houston reached its peak in late 2025, the investigation moved beyond the bayous and into the digital sphere. While the police were mapping drowning coordinates and analyzing toxicology reports, a parallel investigation was being conducted by millions of internet sleuths. This digital surveillance created a boogeyman that local authorities found nearly impossible to defeat: the pervasive rumor of a serial killer stalking the Bayou City. This section of the Houston tragedy reveals a modern phenomenon where social media algorithms and true crime culture can outpace official investigations, creating a reality that is often more terrifying, though less accurate than the truth. The serial killer narrative did not emerge in a vacuum. It was fueled by a direct comparison to Austin's Rainy Street Ripper rumors, which had captivated Texas social media for years. When bodies began appearing in Buffalo Bayou with similar frequency to those in Austin's Lady Bird Lake, influencers quickly drew parallels. Viral videos began to circulate, often using ominous music and leaked claims from anonymous sources, alleging that the Houston Police Department was deliberately covering up a predator's existence to prevent a mass exodus from the city. One specific TikTok account, Daily Rumble, became a central hub for these theories, amassing millions of views by claiming that the math wasn't mathing, a catchphrase used by skeptics like visitor Juan Sandoval to express that 34 deaths in a year simply could not be a coincidence. However, the police discovery regarding these rumors was almost as shocking as the deaths themselves. When investigators looked into the profiles of the 2025 victims, they didn't find the signature of a serial killer. Instead, they found a map of Houston's most deep-seated systemic failures. The data showed that the vast majority of the victims were men in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, many of whom were part of the city's unhoused population or were struggling with a silent epidemic of substance abuse. Toxicology reports frequently cited the presence of For the police, the killer wasn't a man in a mask. It was a lethal combination of a growing fentanyl crisis, extreme heat, and a lack of mental health resources. This creates a fascinating, albeit tragic, psychological conflict. To the public, a serial killer is a monster that can be caught, a villain with a face. But the reality police discovered that dozens of people are dying due to accidental falls, overdoses, and medical emergencies in public spaces is a much more uncomfortable truth. It suggests that the city's infrastructure and social safety nets are so broken that 34 people can die in the heart of the city and go unnoticed for days. Mayor John Whitmire addressed this directly in his December briefings, stating that rumors stir fear, but the real work lies in improving lighting and barriers. In 2025, the digital boogeyman became a shield that allowed the public to ignore the systemic reality. It is easier to believe in a Rainy Street Ripper than to accept that a 14-year-old boy like Shannon Davis or an 81-year-old man like Nicholas Lestrer can drown in a bayou due to a tragic accident or a personal crisis. The police discovery was clear. The fear was real, but it was being directed at a ghost. Meanwhile, the actual causes of death, poverty, addiction, and geography, remained in the shadows, unaddressed by the viral videos and trending hashtags that claimed to be seeking justice. The investigation may not have found a killer, but it did find a city in desperate need of a literal and figurative light. The uncomfortable truth. While the digital world searched for a shadowy predator, the Houston Police Department was uncovering a far more pervasive and systemic killer. The terrifying discovery that emerged from the 2025 investigative data was not the signature of a serial murderer, but the clear, clinical evidence of a social safety net in total collapse. The records from the Harris County Medical Examiner's Office tell a story of a city struggling with a dual crisis: a massive increase in the unhoused population and a lethal new wave of the and epidemic. Mayor John Whitmire and Police Chief Noe Diaz Jr. pointed to a disturbing reality. Many of those found in the bayous were Houston's most vulnerable citizens. Of the 34 bodies recovered, a significant number belonged to individuals experiencing homelessness, living in encampments tucked into the very dead zones where they eventually lost their lives. For these residents, the bayous are not just scenic trails. They are places of refuge and, increasingly, places of extreme danger. Investigators noted that when a member of the unhoused community passes away due to natural causes, exposure, or a medical emergency, their proximity to the water often means their final resting place is the bayou. The medical reports further stripped away the serial killer myth by highlighting the role of acute toxicity. A high percentage of the 2,025 victims had lethal combinations substances in their systems at the time of their deaths. These substances lead to severe disorientation and acute toxic effects, making an accidental fall into the steep, concrete-lined banks of the bayou a death sentence. Police discovered that the spike in bodies was a direct reflection of a deadlier substance supply hitting the streets of Houston, turning a simple walk near the water into a fatal gamble. Ultimately, the terrifying discovery made by the police is that there is no single person to arrest to make the city safe again. The deaths are a byproduct of a systemic failure to address the intersection of addiction, mental health, and poverty. As one resident noted during a December briefing, the boogeyman narrative is almost a comfort because it suggests a problem that can be solved with a pair of handcuffs. The truth that 34 people died largely because they were left to navigate a lethal environment without support is a much harder reality for the city to face. The secrets of the bayou are still surfacing. Do you think it's the work of a single person? Hit subscribe to stay updated as we follow the final forensic reports.